It's Sunday night. You're sitting on your couch, remote in hand, flipping through channels you've already seen twice. Tomorrow is Monday, and you promised yourself this weekend would be different. You were going to exercise, read that book, call your mother, work on that project that's been haunting your desk for 3 months. Instead, you watch 6 hours of television shows you don't even like. Spent 2 hours reading magazines about celebrities you don't care about. Ordered pizza instead of cooking the healthy meal you planned. But here's what will shock you. This isn't happening by accident. Right now, as you sit there, invisible forces are working against you. They're stealing your energy, sabotaging your progress, keeping you trapped in cycles that drain your life force every single day. And here's the terrifying part. Every day you don't recognize these forces, you lose approximately 3 hours of productive time. That's 21 hours per week, 1,095 hours per year. That's equivalent to working a full-time job for 6 months and producing absolutely nothing of value. While you're watching this, these forces are actively working to keep you tired, distracted, and behind in life. But in the next few minutes, I'm going to expose every single one of them. You tell yourself you lack willpower, that you're lazy, that you need more discipline. But what if I told you that none of this is true? What if there are 5 specific forces operating in your life right now that are designed to keep you exhausted and mediocre? Forces so subtle that 99% of people never see them coming. I've spent over 4 decades studying human behavior and the invisible systems that control our choices. What I've discovered will fundamentally change how you understand your own struggles. But here's what nobody tells you. These forces are more powerful now than they've ever been in human history. In the 1950s, the average person was exposed to about 500 advertising messages per day. Today, that number has exploded to over 5,000. The first invisible force is stimulation addiction. And it's destroying your brain's ability to focus on anything meaningful. Your brain has been hijacked by a constant need for novelty and instant gratification. Every channel change, every magazine flip, every time you check email is triggering dopamine hits that feel good in the moment but leave you depleted afterward. This isn't personal weakness. This is neurological hijacking. Your brain evolved to seek novelty as a survival mechanism. When your ancestors spotted something new, it could mean food, danger, or opportunity. But now this ancient survival mechanism is being exploited by systems designed to capture your attention. Here's what's happening. Every time you seek stimulation, you're training your nervous system to need constant entertainment. You're literally rewiring your neural pathways to require external input for basic satisfaction. The result? You're losing the ability to tolerate boredom, to sit with your own thoughts, to focus deeply on one thing for extended periods. But wait until you hear this devastating statistic. The average person's attention span has dropped from 12 minutes in 2000 to just 8 minutes today. That's shorter than a goldfish, which can focus for 9 minutes. James was a talented graphic designer who knew he had the skills to build a successful business, but couldn't make progress. Every time he sat down to work on his portfolio, he'd find himself checking email, reading news websites, or flipping through design magazines for inspiration. James would sit down at 9 a.m. with the intention of working for 3 hours straight. By 9:15, he checked email twice. By 9:30, he was reading an article about design trends. By 10 a.m., he was looking at other designers' work online. By 11 a.m., he'd accomplished nothing meaningful, but felt mentally exhausted. James wasn't lazy. His brain had been trained to seek stimulation every few minutes. The moment he encountered the natural discomfort that comes with challenging, creative work, his nervous system would automatically seek relief through distraction. Here's what's terrifying. James was losing 4.5 hours every day to this pattern. That's 1,642 hours per year. That's an entire month of productive time vanishing into thin air. But here's where it gets even more devastating. This first force creates the perfect conditions for the second invisible force to take hold. When your attention is scattered and your focus is broken, you become desperately vulnerable to what I call comparison poisoning. And this is where the destruction really accelerates. You're constantly measuring your fragmented, incomplete progress against other people's finished, polished, carefully curated highlight reels. This creates a persistent sense of inadequacy that drains your motivation and makes everything you accomplish feel worthless. Every day, you're exposed to hundreds of images through television, magazines, and advertisements of people who appear more successful, more attractive, more accomplished than you are. Your brain, which evolved to use social comparison within small tribal groups of 50 to 150 people, is now trying to process comparisons with millions of strangers whose lives you see only through carefully edited presentation. This creates what psychologists call compare and despair. No matter what you achieve, there's always someone who appears to be doing better. But here's what nobody tells you about this poison. These comparisons aren't accidental. They're strategically designed to make you feel inadequate, so you'll buy more products, consume more media, seek more external validation. Rachel was a yoga instructor who genuinely loved teaching and had built a loyal following of students who adored her classes. But she felt constantly inadequate. Why? Because she'd spend 2 hours every morning flipping through yoga magazines, looking at other instructors with perfect bodies, teaching in pristine studios to packed rooms of beautiful people. These magazines showed her instructors who appeared to have effortless poses, flawless skin, expensive clothing, and studios that looked like luxury spas. Meanwhile, Rachel taught in a community center with worn carpets and fluorescent lighting to real people with real bodies. Rachel was poisoning her own sense of accomplishment by comparing her reality to other people's marketing. Here's the devastating truth. Rachel was spending 2 hours every day consuming media that made her feel worse about herself. That's 730 hours per year of voluntary self-destruction. But the tragedy goes deeper. Those 2 hours weren't just making Rachel feel bad. They were stealing time she could have spent developing her teaching skills, building relationships with students, or creating the very improvements that would have made her feel genuinely confident. And here's where the trap gets even deeper. The combination of scattered attention from stimulation addiction and eroded confidence from comparison poisoning creates the perfect storm for the third invisible force. When your brain is fragmented and your confidence is shattered, you become desperately susceptible to decision fatigue. And this is where your willpower gets completely destroyed. You're making so many trivial choices throughout the day that you exhaust your mental resources before you ever get to the decisions that could actually change your life. From the moment you wake up, you're bombarded with an endless stream of choices. What to wear, what to eat, which route to take, which emails to respond to first, what to watch, how to spend your evening. Here's the shocking truth. The average person makes 35,000 decisions per day. That's one decision every 2.5 seconds during waking hours. Your brain literally cannot handle this cognitive load. Studies show that judges make harsher sentences right before lunch when their decision-making capacity is depleted. Shoppers make worse financial choices later in the day. This isn't about intelligence. This is about a fundamental limitation of human neurology. Robert was a marketing manager who couldn't understand why he felt completely exhausted every evening despite having a comfortable desk job. He'd come home mentally drained, unable to work on the novel he'd been writing for 5 years. Robert would start his day feeling energized, but by the time he got to work, he'd already made dozens of decisions. What to wear, what to have for breakfast, which coffee shop to stop at, which route to take to work. Once at work, the decision avalanche continued. Which emails to read first, how to respond to each message, which meetings to attend, what to have for lunch, which projects to prioritize. Robert was burning through his decision-making capacity on thousands of trivial choices. By the time he got home, his willpower was completely gone. Here's what's terrifying. Robert was losing his creative potential every single day because his mental energy was being drained by decisions that didn't matter. But here's where the system gets truly diabolical. Once your willpower is depleted from decision fatigue, you become a perfect target for the fourth invisible force. When you're mentally exhausted from making thousands of trivial decisions, you start engaging in what I call productivity theater. You confuse being busy with being productive, motion with progress, activity with achievement. You answer emails immediately instead of working on important projects. You attend meetings that accomplish nothing. You reorganize your workspace instead of doing the work. You research and plan endlessly without ever taking action. And here's what's shocking. Studies show that the average office worker is only genuinely productive for 2 hours and 48 minutes out of an 8-hour workday. The remaining 5 hours and 12 minutes are spent on productivity theater. David was working 60-hour weeks, but felt like he accomplished nothing important. His days were completely filled with meetings, emails, phone calls, reports, and administrative tasks. But when I asked David what he had created or achieved in the past year that he was genuinely proud of, he couldn't give me a single example. David was trapped in productivity theater. He was so busy performing the role of an important professional that he'd forgotten to do work that actually mattered. His calendar was packed with meetings that could have been emails. His inbox was overflowing with messages that didn't require responses. His days were filled with urgent tasks that weren't actually important. Here's the devastating math. David was spending 58 hours per week on activities that produced 0 meaningful results. That's 3,016 hours per year of wasted life. And here's where the trap becomes complete. When you're exhausted from stimulation addiction, demoralized by comparison poisoning, Depleted by decision fatigue and frustrated by productivity theater, you become vulnerable to the fifth and most dangerous invisible force. You get trapped by what I call comfort zone gravity. You create a life that's comfortable enough that you don't have to change, but not satisfying enough that you feel truly alive. This gray zone of mediocrity is where most people spend their entire lives, never uncomfortable enough to take decisive action, never fulfilled enough to feel genuinely complete. Your comfort zone isn't just about avoiding risk, it's about avoiding the discomfort of growth, the uncertainty of change, the vulnerability that comes with trying something new. As I've always said, you cannot be lonely if you like the person you're alone with. But most people are running from themselves into comfortable distractions because they've lost touch with who they really are. When you're not growing, you're dying. When you're not challenging yourself, you're becoming weaker. When you're not expanding, you're contracting into a smaller version of yourself. Amanda was a talented writer who'd been working in corporate communications for 15 years. She had a gift for language and dreams of writing novels that could touch people's lives. But she told herself she couldn't afford to take the risk. Her job was stable, the benefits were excellent, her family depended on her income. But every day Amanda spent writing marketing materials for products she didn't care about was a day she wasn't spending on work that could fulfill her soul. Amanda was trapped by comfort zone gravity. Her life was good enough that she couldn't justify the discomfort of change, but not good enough that she felt truly alive. Here's the terrifying truth. Amanda was trading her dreams for a security that didn't even exist. Her stable job could disappear tomorrow, but the years she wasn't writing could never be recovered. Now here's where this gets truly frightening. These five forces don't work in isolation. They work together in a coordinated system to create what I call the exhaustion trap. Stimulation addiction fragments your attention, making you vulnerable to comparison poisoning. Comparison poisoning erodes your confidence, making you susceptible to decision fatigue. Decision fatigue depletes your willpower, leading to productivity theater. And productivity theater keeps you so busy that comfort zone gravity feels like your only refuge. You're not tired because you're working hard on meaningful things. You're exhausted because you're fighting against invisible currents specifically designed to drain your energy. The tragic irony is that the harder you try to succeed within these systems, the more exhausted you become. It's like swimming upstream against increasingly powerful currents. But here's what changes everything. Right now, in this very moment. Once you see these forces clearly, once you understand exactly how they operate, you can learn to work with the current instead of against it. As I've often said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you start seeing these invisible forces clearly, you can begin to neutralize their power over your life. The transformation begins with what I call conscious resistance. Instead of unconsciously submitting to these forces, you start making deliberate choices about how you spend your attention, energy, and time. This means creating environments that support sustained focus instead of constant distraction. It means developing practices that build your tolerance for boredom and discomfort. It means establishing clear boundaries around the information you consume. Start by conducting a brutally honest audit of how you actually spend your time and energy. Track your activities for 1 full week without judgment. Just observe and record. Notice how often you check email when you're not expecting anything important. Notice how much time you spend consuming information that doesn't serve your goals. Notice how many decisions you make about things that don't matter. Notice when you're engaging in productivity theater versus actual progress. Notice when you're comparing yourself to others instead of focusing on your own journey. Notice when you're choosing comfort over growth. This awareness alone will begin to shift your relationship with these forces. You'll start seeing patterns that were previously invisible. But here's the urgent truth. Every day you delay developing this awareness costs you. Every week you remain unconscious of these patterns, they grow stronger. Every month you stay trapped, they become harder to break. The next step is to design systems that support your highest intentions instead of undermining them. This isn't about willpower or discipline. It's about creating conditions where good choices become easier. Simplify your daily decisions by creating routines for things that don't matter so you can preserve mental energy for things that do. Limit your exposure to sources of artificial stimulation and toxic comparison. Create spaces that support deep work and meaningful relationships. Most importantly, reconnect with a clear vision of who you're becoming and why it matters. These invisible forces are powerful, but they're not stronger than a person with clear purpose and the wisdom to align daily choices with deepest values. Remember what I've always taught. You are not stuck where you are unless you decide to be. The people who break free from these patterns have simply learned to recognize the forces that drain most people's energy and have consciously chosen to live differently. You have the exact same capacity for focus, creativity, and sustained effort that any successful person has. The difference is whether you're using that capacity to fight invisible currents or to move in alignment with your authentic intentions. The path forward isn't about perfection or dramatic changes. It's about small, conscious choices made consistently over time. It's about recognizing when you're being pulled into distraction and gently redirecting your attention to what matters. It's about understanding that your energy is your most precious resource and becoming fiercely protective of how you invest it. The invisible forces that have been keeping you tired, distracted, and behind don't have to control your future. They only have power as long as they remain invisible. Once you see them clearly, you can choose differently. You can choose to be conscious instead of unconscious, intentional instead of reactive, aligned instead of scattered. You can choose to design your life to support your highest potential instead of settling for comfortable mediocrity. But here's the critical truth. These forces are getting stronger every day. The systems designed to capture your attention are becoming more sophisticated. The window for breaking free is narrowing, not because change becomes impossible, but because the longer these patterns operate unconsciously, the more entrenched they become. As I've said many times, you'll see it when you believe it. And when you truly believe that these invisible forces can be overcome, you'll start seeing opportunities for freedom everywhere. Your life is waiting for you to claim it. Your potential is waiting for you to honor it. Your future self is waiting for you to make the conscious choices today that will set you free. The power to break free has always been within you. You've always had the capacity to live with focus, energy, purpose, and authentic fulfillment. The question isn't whether you have what it takes. The question is whether you're willing to use this power before these invisible forces steal another day, another week, another year of the life you were meant to live. What will you choose? And when will you choose it?